Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ballet Rain. It is back! By extremely popular request, we are super proud to be in the box today to present to you guys the official full ballet analysis of the timeless, iconic, and beloved classic Don Quixote. Woo!
A lot of you guys have been asking for another full ballet analysis, Don Q specifically, and a lot of you have questions about the story, the plot, and of course the biggest question, does the ballet Don Quixote properly adhere to the novel from which it came?
Incidentally, the ballet world seems to be launching into a very heavy season for Don Quixote.
So we thought now would be the perfect time to properly educate you guys on this ballet and its history, its story, and its music so that you will be properly prepared to enjoy all of the Don Q that the world has to offer.
If you have your little ballet nerd hat on, have a seat. This is gonna be a long video. Grab some snacks, hit the like button, and here we go.
For context,
because it's not a Ballet Rain video without your much needed copious amounts of context. The ballet Don Quixote, in case you didn't know, is actually inspired by the novel of the same name, written by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Don Quixote the novel is actually known as one of the first modern novels of all time ever. So as you might expect, it is quite a prestigious piece of literature.
the story features the tales of an eccentric old man of Spanish origin named Alonso Quijano. And he, due to reading far too many books on chivalry and romance, completely loses his mind and decides to become a knight and embark on a grand adventure to restore chivalry and justice to the nations.
He changes his name to Don Quixote de la Mancha,
Don Quixote for short,
and appoints a farmer named Sancho Panza to be his squire. Together, they embark on lots of different adventures, including battling windmills, which Don Quixote, in his delusion, believed to be monsters, and other adventures of that sort.
Don Quixote also believes that he, as a knight, of course, indeed must have a lady of love. But as he has none, he decides to create one of his own imagination, making her the picture of love, purity, and perfect beauty.
He chooses a young farm girl named Aldonza Lorenzo to be the ideal candidate for such an entity, and renames her, unbeknownst to her, Dulcinea del Toboso. He then pledges himself to her, and he promises to restore the lost virtues of humanity in her name.
I love this story. So there's a lot of confusion
delusion
and conflict in this whole story. So Don Quixote then becomes a menace to society, quite literally, starting all kinds of fights in order to defend the honor of his imaginary Dulcinea. But in the end, he was forced to give up his mission in knight errantry after losing a duel to one of his friends in disguise.
Don Quixote goes home defeated and falls asleep, but when he wakes up, he finds himself back in his right mind. He apologizes for all the trouble that he's caused, and then he makes his niece, who's cared for him this whole time, the main benefactor of his will, on the one condition that she will never marry a man who reads books of romance and chivalry.
As wonderful as the full story is, the ballet Don Quixote unfortunately does not encapsulate the novel in its entirety. Rather, it focuses on this particular incident in the second part of Don Quixote, where Don Quixote helps to unite Quiteria and Basilio, a young couple who are endangered of being separated due to an arranged marriage.
As you'll see in a little bit, the ballet focuses mainly on Quiteria and Basilio, or in the ballet they're named Quitri and Basilio, with less attention on the titular character Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. Although that's not to say that they ignore them entirely, because they do make some very key appearances throughout the ballet.
So this novel, being one of the first of its kind of became a huge sensation, and there are actually various attempts to translate this famous novel into a ballet, spanning the years of 1740 to 1843. Unfortunately, these first few versions of the ballet Don Quixote have fallen into the oblivion and actually aren't performed anymore. Enter Petipa.
It's always Petipa.
We all know Petipa, one of the greatest names in the realm of classical ballet.
Petipa at the time was the maître de ballet at the Tsar's Imperial Ballet in St. Petersburg, which is modern-day Mariinsky Ballet. And so when he was commissioned to create a Don Quixote for the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow, he set out to take the world by storm with his own production of Don Quixote. And with composer Ludwig Minkus at his side, he begins the work. This was actually the first time that Petapa and Minkus would work on a ballet together, and it sort of marked the beginning of
like a lifelong collaboration.
Yeah, they went on to enjoy a really long and successful creative partnership, and they created many of the world's greatest ballets today, including Paquita and also La Bayadere.
So, in the year of 1869, Minkus and Petapa's shiny new production of Don Quixote premiered in the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow on the 26th of December. And of course, Petapa did what only Petapa can do, and Don Quixote was met with resounding applause and was considered a great success.
So, that's the Don Quixote we know and love today?
Not quite.
In 1871, Petapa revised and sort of upgraded Don Quixote to suit his home ballet theater, the Imperial Ballet in St. Petersburg, far surpassing his previous version for the Bolshoi, with a breathtaking 5 acts, consisting of a prologue, 11 scenes,
and an epilogue.
So a very, very, very ambitious, very grand production. Don Q 2.0 premiered on November 21st of 1871 and was also, of course, a grand success.
But no, we're not done yet. In 1900s, Petapa's Don Quixote was revised again, but this time by his protege, Alexander Gorsky. And Gorsky added a lot of the famous divertissements and numbers that we are familiar with in today's Don Quixote, commissioning Anton Simon to write the music for those additional scenes. These include the Dulcinea variation, the Queen of the Dryads variation, and of course the iconic Kitri Act 3 variation with the fan.
Gorsky is also responsible for the lifelike crowd scenes in Don Quixote. During his creation of the ballet, he had the surrounding dancers be more integrated into the world and the story, rather than being essentially part of the background. Gorsky completely omitted the clean lines and symmetry that Petapa was known for. Instead, he had the dancers move throughout the scene and, interact in a more playful and natural way, in hopes of creating a more candid and realistic setting.
This free-spirited and joyful quality, of course, was later to become the most endearing charm of the ballet, both for the dancers and audiences today. Gorsky premiered Don Q 3.0 at the Bolshoi Theater in 1900, and then here comes the drama.
Ooh. Vladimir Telyakovsky, who was the new director of the Imperial Ballet at the time, was not a fan of Petapa, and he was kind of looking for a way to get rid of him. So he invited Gorsky to stage his new Don Q 3.0 on the Imperial Ballet in St. Petersburg in hopes of overthrowing Petapa. Gorsky agreed, revised the ballet further, and then premiered it there in 1902.
The plot thickens. The St. Petersburg premiere was actually not received well at all. Some loved the revival, but others despised it, describing Gorsky's revisions to be, and I quote, a mutilation of Petapa's original masterpiece. When Petapa heard that Gorsky's revival of his ballet was to be staged in his home company, he was shocked and outraged since he had never been informed or at all involved with Gorsky's revival of his beloved ballet.
Petapa seemed to have been quite aware of the attempts to replace him because when he was sitting in to watch a dress rehearsal of Gorsky's production, he reportedly shouted out loud, "Will someone tell that young man that I am not yet dead?"
Despite the bad reviews, the drama, and the opposing opinions regarding the ballet, Don Q 3.0 defied all odds and managed to live on in Russia. Don Q 3.0 survived the Russian Revolution and eventually ended up becoming a staple ballet in the Bolshoi ballet repertoire, becoming the base that pretty much every production of Don Q today is drawn from. And despite its original ill reception, the ballet's rich history has shaped a masterpiece that is unanimously applauded and recognized as one of the greatest works of the classical ballet repertoire. And this is the Don Quixote that we know and love today. So that's how Don Quixote novel became Don Quixote ballet. But does the ballet Don Quixote actually stay true to its roots in the world's first novel?
Perhaps we will make that conclusion at the end of the video.
So let's get into the plot. So starting with the prologue, the ballet opens with our eccentric old man Don Quixote and his companion Sancho Panza.
So depending on the production, there will be varying amounts of detail describing just who we're dealing with here. But the main premise is that Don Quixote, an eccentric man, loves his books on chivalry, and he wants to become a knight to restore chivalry to the world and search for his lady Dulcinea.
In some versions, the prologue can be as short as just a scene of him reading his books and suiting up for work, and sometimes it can go as long as to include an entire vision of Dulcinea, maybe even him fighting some evil spirits, and sometimes even a little scene of Sancho Panza getting in a fight with some village girls over a chicken he stole. Anyhow, the tranquil music in this very first scene establishes itself as the theme or leitmotif for Dulcinea, conveying her delicacy, grace, and tenderness that Don Quixote dreams of.
By the end of the prologue, Don Quixote is so convicted in his calling that he summons Sancho Panza to accompany him as his squire as he goes out into the world to do noble things for the good of all in the name of the Lady of Love, Dulcinea. Sancho Panza brings him his armor, which is often very makeshift armor consisting of like a basin for his helmet and his bedpost for a lance. And after a reverent salute to the imaginary Dulcinea, they exit the scene.
And now Act 1 begins, and the opening of Act 1 provides a very sharp contrast between Don Quixote's archaic reverence in the prologue, and the curtain opens to reveal a colorful town square in Barcelona.
There are a lot of townsfolk dancing, children playing, and generally people going about their daily lives.
Also in this very first opening, we get to meet one of our key characters, Lorenzo. Sometimes he's the owner of a restaurant, sometimes he's an innkeeper, but regardless of his profession, it is usually stated pretty obviously that he is very, very rich. Not only is Lorenzo very wealthy, but he also has a pretty high position in society. And so when he walks around the town square, you can see everyone makes a point to come and greet him as he parades around.
Lorenzo passes through the square, and just as he leaves, the main female ballet protagonist of the day comes charging onto the scene. This is Quixote, Lorenzo's daughter, and of course, as all female protagonists must be, she is uncommonly beautiful and the most popular, most beloved girl in the whole town. Quixote performs her opening variation, which is absolutely bursting with energy, and it really helps us right away to grasp her character and the kind of person she is. She is a strong-willed girl. She is like a spitfire kind of character. She has such a powerful presence, and she really enjoys basking in the attention of everyone in the square. Another cute thing to note, I just found this is cute, she stops midway through the variation to chat with her friends. So it kind of helps you to grasp her charisma, her sociability. She's really just a people person.
Directly following this comes our main male ballet protagonist, Basilio, Quixote's love interest. And unlike Lorenzo, Basilio is not rich. He is a barber. But don't worry, Basilio also has a side hustle as a musician, which means he's still not rich.
He's here for Quixote, of course. But when he goes to greet her, Quixote pays him absolutely no attention, because that's sort of the person she is. She teases Basilio a lot, and especially in this opening parada.
Because as you all know, if you're a female village ballet protagonist, you must have a considerable skill in flirting.
They play around like this and dance for a little bit longer, including some "I'll trade you my fan for your guitar" shenanigans, and the classic show the foot, take the foot game that literally every ballet protagonist plays with her beau or her lover or love interest or whatever. And so the opening parada really paints the picture right off the bat of their very playful, teasing dynamic.
You might notice even this early on in the ballet that there's a lot of theatrical acting that goes on in this scene, compared with other ballets such as Sleeping Beauty or Swan Lake, for example. For this, Don Quixote is considered what is called a pantomime ballet, which involves the dancers initiating a lot of mimed conversations and going about acting like, regular people. Because of this concept, the ballet might appear slightly akin to like a movie, because it really brings the characters to life through relatable interactions in conjunction with the dancing.
A little bit later, Lorenzo comes back onto the scene looking for his daughter, and he catches Quixote with Basilio and goes, "Oh no, this will not do." Basilio explains that he and Quixote are very much in love and would like to get married, while Quixote tries to further convince and pacify her father. Lorenzo tells Basilio that if he wants to marry his daughter, he is going to need money. Basilio, lacking the much-needed cash in his pocket at present, tells Lorenzo not to worry. He will make copious amounts of money because he is a barber.
And to this, Lorenzo goes, "Oh no, this will not do," and shoos poor Basilio away.
Basilio and Quixote attempt multiple times to convince Lorenzo that they would make a very adorable couple, or at least be very happy together.
But eventually, Lorenzo sends Basilio away and commands Quixote to sit down and be quiet.
The music here in this particular section is absolutely brilliant.
Exquisite.
You can hear such clear dialogue between Quixote and Basilio and Lorenzo.
Yes.
There's this quiet section where Quixote and Basilio are trying to convince Lorenzo, listen, we can be together, we love each other, it doesn't matter if we don't have money. And Lorenzo just interrupts him with, nope, absolutely not, that is not happening here.
We'll just let you guys watch it and listen for yourself, just this particular scene, because it's absolutely brilliant. So you can pretty much hear the exact words that they're saying, combined with like the expression and the pantomime. It's just perfect. The music for Don Q was kind of revolutionary in the ballet world, and it was considered one of the first of its kind in the sense of they have dancey music separated by scene music. While ballets prior to this consisted of almost exclusively just dancey music. Scene music is less about making beautiful, symmetrical melodies and more about creating a very clear dialogue between characters or even describing a character's personality. And this makes the plot particularly clear, especially for a pantomime ballet such as this.
While Kichiri is in timeout pouting, into the square comes a new character and his name is Gamache. And we can tell by his appearance and the entrance music alone that he has A, a ton of money, and B, a room temperature IQ. He's very pompous and rather flimsy, but nevertheless he's looking for a wife, and upon first glance he finds Kichiri to be quite the catch. He expresses his sentiments to Lorenzo, who is only too pleased about the prospect of such a wealthy match for his daughter.
But Kichiri, however, is indignant. She ignores Gamache until her father, completely fed up with her antics, stands her up and puts her arm through the arm of her despised suitor and attempts to send them off into their happily ever after. Kichiri then proceeds to bop Gamache on the head and spins him around in ridicule before telling her father one last time that she will indeed not marry that man Gamache, and then skips off to find Basilio.
Lorenzo, exasperated, exits the scene, and here we take a break from the plot to go on a little tangent to see what a day in the life in Ballet Barcelona looks like. Among the townsfolk dancing, we get to meet the local street dancer. Sometimes her name is Mercedes, and sometimes she's just a nameless street dancer.
Yeah.
She announces the arrival of a procession of matadors that come parading into the square.
Espada, who is the most famed of the matadors, takes a liking to the street dancer and partners her throughout the entire Grand Pas de Toreadors. During this scene, he and the other matadors tell the listening townsfolk about the thrills of their most recent bullfights, as he and the other matadors swirl their impressive red capes and brandish their daggers to illustrate the excitement of the fight.
The street dancer also takes an opportunity to show off to Espada as well by performing a daring variation as the matadors place their daggers, and in some versions they're like little goblets in different formations on the stage.
One might argue that Espada, the street dancer, and the matadors and all these other divertissements kind of distract from the main plot, but we find that this is not the case. Rather, it adds a very important world-building component to the ballet, introducing us to the celebrities and culture of Don Quixote's world and giving us a little bit more depth beyond just our main ballet protagonists.
This makes Don Quixote's setting seem even more warm and personable and lifelike, and it draws us further into the story and into their community. Also, it's a fantastic opportunity to showcase some incredible dancing, complete with fancy capes. Y'all know how we feel about the fancy capes! But anyway, we digress.
And finally, after all of that, following the excitement of the matadors, we finally get to welcome our titular character, Don Quixote, and his squire, Sancho Panza. As they come riding into the square, all the people gather around to behold this very interesting spectacle.
Don Quixote has presumably been traveling for quite some time, so he asks if there's any places where he can get some water and recuperate. Sancho Panza echoes his question, being quite the foodie and eager to get some refreshments, and the onlookers point him in the direction of the local restaurant.
Sancho thanks them, but before he goes to the restaurant, he stops to sound a tremendous fanfare in order to herald Don Quixote's arrival, leaving himself rather out of breath and the crowds rather hard of hearing.
Sancho Panza continues on to the restaurant, and Don Quixote goes about to bow respectfully to all the ladies standing around, as a good knight would.
As Don Quixote retires to the restaurant, the young townsgirls begin to poke fun at the hapless Sancho Panza. They put a blindfold on him and make him play blind man's bluff as they dance, which is brilliantly illustrated illustrated with the chirpy, cheerful, and unserious music in this part of the ballet. In the music, there are a lot of trills and grace notes, which might be interpreted as the girls laughing and teasing Sancho as they dance.
The other townsfolk take notice and decide to join the Sancho abuse, and Sancho quickly grows tired of the game and shoos the girls away. But the young men, having become sufficiently rowdy after all the fun and games already, seize poor Sancho Panza and begin throwing him in the air. This moment of Sancho Panza being thrown in the air is actually taken from the original novel, and it serves as a very good way to introduce Don Quixote and Sancho Panza to our existing characters.
Right.
And honestly, it is simply far too iconic to omit.
But thankfully, Don Quixote, armed with a fork and a food platter, comes to Sancho's rescue and removes him from his humiliating predicament.
Quixote and Basilio re-enter the scene, having successfully eluded Quixote's father, and when Don Quixote sees Quixote for the first time, he becomes absolutely awestruck and utterly convinced that he has finally succeeded in his quest and he has found his lady Dulcinea.
Which poses the question, is Quixote really modeled after Quiteria? Or is she modeled after the character Aldanza Lorenzo? After all, her father's name is Lorenzo, and Don Quixote clearly mistakes her for Dulcinea. Food for thought, I don't know. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Quixote, partly out of curiosity of this strange knight fellow, and partly just to tease Basilio, she accepts Don Quixote's invitation to dance with her and ignores Basilio completely.
This naturally causes some jealousy, disappointment, and confusion on Basilio's side, but when he sees Gamache pair off with one of Quixote's friends, and the other one of Quixote's friends dancing on her own, he decides that this is a perfect opportunity to get back at Quixote, and decides to join her friend for the minuet.
Quixote notices this and decides that the game has gone a little too far, and she quickly leaves the old knight and tries to make up her errors with Basilio.
As this is going on, Don Quixote conveniently dissolves into the crowd.
Whoops.
He just goes away and defers the spotlight back to our main couple.
Because the ballet isn't really about him, even though the ballet is literally named after him, right? Following this, we have a short sequence of divertissements, including a pas de trois with Basilio and Quixote's two best friends, and then of course the iconic Act 1 variation for Quixote. It is sometimes performed with castanets and sometimes without, but regardless, this 45-second variation is probably the biggest showstopper piece of the entire act, with the famed Quixote jeté, and of course the iconic sequence of pirouettes from fifth along a diagonal of matadors.
The variation does vary from production to production, but those two steps, the Quixote jeté and the diagonal of pirouettes, remain constant, and they always, without fail, drive a huge round of applause from the audience. The variation showcases Quixote's energetic personality and fighting spirit, and is a brilliant demonstration of the ballerina's technical, athletic, and artistic abilities. I've actually done this variation before,
Yeah, you
and
have.
despite it being so short, it is very, very, very difficult.
It's like 45 seconds of just madness.
Yeah, it's like a hit workout, you know?
Yeah.
Like 45
45
seconds
seconds
on,
on.
and then like 30 seconds off. It's very intense, but it's so much fun.
The act closes with an exciting coda, and the entire town joins together in dancing. And as Lorenzo and Gamache attempt to catch Quixote for the final time, Don Quixote thrusts out his lance, blocking them, allowing Quixote and Basilio to escape through the crowds of dancers. And that is the end of Act 1. Honestly, Act 1 I think is my favorite part of Don Quixote. There's so much action, so much dancing, so much color and spirit in it. Yeah, it's honestly such a joy to dance. So, that was the end of Act 1. We'll be going to Act 2 in just a little bit. Feel free to pause the video, get yourself some more snacks and another drink, and we'll catch you in just a second. We need a snack and a drink.
We need a snack and a drink immediately. Act 2, let's go! Act 2 begins with a haunting tune on tremoring strings, and the curtain opens to reveal a dark scene in the woods. Is it even a ballet if the Act 2 doesn't open to a dark scene in the woods? Quixote and Basilio enter the scene, having presumably been running from their pursuers for quite some time now, and they decide to try and find a place to rest for the night. They stumble across a camp of travelers who awake and, after questioning the couple, decide to welcome them for the night. In some of the productions of Don Quixote, Basilio begs them not to tell Lorenzo and Gamache of their whereabouts, and the travelers give them disguises to conceal them amongst the group. But in any case, the travelers then perform an absolutely incredible dance with so much energy and life and some really tiring, technically challenging athletic choreography.
Not long after, the wild, frenzied music morphs into a triumphant fanfare as Don Quixote and Sancho ride into the scene in search of Dulcinea. He spots Quixote and bows to her as he greets her as Dulcinea. And then the travelers have everyone seated to enjoy some more entertainment. But this time, it's a marionette theater.
As Don Quixote watches, he becomes more and more invested in the puppet show. The little princess and her lover in the story remind him somewhat of Quixote and Basilio, and the two antagonists look suspiciously like Lorenzo and Gamache. He watches in great suspense as the story unfolds, but as little soldiers march in circles, posing a threat to the princess and her lover, Don Quixote becomes increasingly overwhelmed, and in an attempt to save the couple, he leaps up and pierces the puppet tent with his sword.
Suddenly, a gust of wind blows, turning the windmills nearby. Don Quixote pulls his sword out of the tent and looks around, and when he sees the windmills, he is convinced that they are giants terrorizing the towns and intends to defeat them.
Despite Sancho Panza's many attempts to tell Don Quixote that the giants he's seeing are really only windmills, Don Quixote seizes his lance and sets out on his noble quest to save the people. Don Quixote stabs his lance at the windmill and gets it caught in the flag. He is then hurled into the air and crashes to the ground, where he is promptly knocked unconscious as Sancho Panza cries out in horror for his master.
Don Quixote's sleep is greatly troubled by dreams, and the contents of this dream can vary from production to production. Sometimes you can see him chasing off the little soldiers and saving the puppet princess, and sometimes he's battling off evil spirits that closely resemble the windmills. Either way, Don Quixote conquers, and a peaceful silence falls upon the entire atmosphere. A sweet melody in his ear calls to him, and this is the same theme that we heard in the prologue associated with Dulcinea. And as he follows the trail of song, he is transported into a magical vision.
Thus begins the dream scene. In this vision, he sees his lady of love Dulcinea, accompanied by Cupid, the queen of the dryads, and an entire host of lovely fairies. They all dance for Don Quixote in honor of him defending the poor puppets and fighting off the windmills. And it is in this scene that we see a trifecta of very iconic variations. The Cupid variation, the queen of the dryad variation, and the Dulcinea variation. The Cupid and the Queen of the Dryads are seemingly unnecessary characters.
Right.
But I think, this is our opinion at this point, it seems as if it's Don Quixote's psyche that's translating his previous experiences with Quixote and her two friends.
Right.
Translating them into mythical, ethereal creatures.
And sometimes in different productions, they do have Quixote's friends play those two characters as well, although it's not the case for every single production. However, the dancer who plays Dulcinea is usually the same dancer who plays Quixote. And this is to further illustrate the point of how Don Quixote could possibly have messed up Dulcinea and Quixote in his mind, and furthermore to show what Don Quixote imagines when he sees Quixote in real life. However, the ballerina must undergo the challenge of portraying an entirely different character in Dulcinea than she did when she was in Quixote. The movement quality for Dulcinea has to be a lot more fluid and elegant and luxurious than Quixote, and that combined with the soft ethereal music proves the fact that Quixote and Dulcinea are two separate entities.
In this dream scene, we really kind of delve into Don Quixote's mind to really see where he's at in his journey, because he thought he had found Dulcinea in Quixote. But now, when he's seeing the real Dulcinea before him, he realizes the error of his ways, that he's been mistaking a regular girl for Dulcinea for the entirety of the ballet up until this point. So I think here his mission sort of shifts. Now that he has found Dulcinea, he is inspired to continue on and help Quixote unite with Basilio.
In some versions, Dulcinea will send him on his way to fight for the justice of Quixote and Basilio. And sometimes it's left pretty vague. Honestly, some dream scenes don't have Don Quixote involved all that much. It does vary, but in the end, Don Quixote does come to the conclusion that Dulcinea and Quixote are separate people and feels compassion on Quixote and Basilio and is inspired to fight for their cause. Sancho, now joined by Lorenzo and Gamache, wake up Don Quixote, interrupting his dream. Lorenzo asks Don Quixote where Quixote and Basilio went, and Don Quixote, armed with his new realization from the dream, tries to fool them by pointing them in the wrong way. However, Lorenzo picks up on his little trick and sets off in the opposite direction that Don Quixote had suggested, and so Don Quixote and Sancho follow them in order to protect Quixote and Basilio. Curtain closes, and that is the end of Act 2. Much shorter, to be honest, in terms of story, but the dream scene is definitely an iconic scene. It's really a beautiful part of Don Quixote. Act 3 opens in a local tavern, and again we get to meet with some familiar faces. Kichi's two best friends are there, along with Espada and the Matadors, and then we get to meet a new character, Mercedes, and she is kind of like another street dancer, and she gets to do a fabulous character dance later on in the act, which is really, really impressive. Although it has to be noted that in some productions, Mercedes and the street dancer are the same person rather than being separate, but it does vary from production to production.
Kichi and Basilio enter the scene again, of course, and as they enter, the entire tavern erupts with celebration because I'm presuming that they're happy to have them back after they just ran away. But shortly following them come Lorenzo and Gamache, still hot on Kichi's tail. Despite her friends trying to hide her, Lorenzo finds Kichi, drags her over to Gamache, and puts her hand in his, insisting that they marry. Basilio, who had conveniently slipped out of the scene, re-enters the scene shrouded in a dark cloak. Having seen Gamache kissing Kichi's hand, he bursts between the two of them and, turning on Kichi, accuses her of unfaithfulness. In his despair, he pulls a knife out from his cloak and shows it to the crowd, declaring that he would sooner die than go on without the love of his life. The crowd panics, and Kichi begs him to reconsider, but Basilio, shoving her to the side, stabs himself as the crowds turn away in breathless horror.
But then, Basilio looks up at the audience with a sneaky grin on his face. He didn't stab himself at all, really. And this is all just a part of his elaborate plan to obtain Lorenzo's blessing to marry Kichi. And so far, everything is going along perfectly. He lays down his cloak and lies down on it dramatically as if dead.
And this part of the scene is particularly special because every danseur is encouraged to find their own interpretation and bring something new to this specific moment.
Sometimes he looks a little bit realistic and he's actually feeling very, very in character in this moment. And sometimes he's just being super melodramatic and in a very cartoonish and kind of foolish way, but somehow everybody buys it.
This is a really special moment. It's like a brief time where the fourth wall is broken, so to speak, and Basilio kind of looks at you like, shh, this is our secret now, okay? Don't tell anybody. Don't laugh too hard. Don't give it away.
There's very few moments where the characters on stage relate to the audience in this way. And so it's a very unique and very special moment in the classical ballet repertoire.
Kichi, of course, is completely distraught, and she rushes over to Basilio, reaffirming her love and fidelity to him before he dies. The crowds gather to comfort her, but at this point, Basilio secretly kisses her cheek to let her know that he is, in fact, alive and not mad at her at all. In some versions, he even whispers his entire plan to her and tells her to play along.
That's a really funny detail, and I love it when they add that. Lorenzo and Gamache are only too delighted about Basilio's death, and Lorenzo once again tries to set Kichi up with Gamache. But Kichi stamps her foot and runs back to mourn over the loss of her beloved. Don Quixote steps in at this moment, actually, and defends Kichi by having Gamache carried away by the young men in the tavern, as punishment for disrespecting the mourning and the dead. Per Basilio's request, Kichi then runs to her father and begs him to please let her marry Basilio as his dying wish. And though her father hesitates at first, with a little persuasion from Don Quixote and his lance, he finally agrees. After all, it is not at all right to deny a dying man's wish.
Lorenzo lays his hands of blessing on the couple, but just as he does, Basilio leaps up from where he was lying, completely fine.
Lorenzo is stunned and completely horrified at the turn of events, but he can't do anything now that he's already given them his blessing.
Nevertheless, all the people in the tavern erupt in cheers, and they all begin to dance with joy and gladness in celebration of the long-awaited engagement of Kichi and Basilio. Questionable way to get engaged, but
questionable. Don't fake your death to get your girlfriend. That's not what you should do. But in Ballet Barcelona,
anything goes.
Anything goes. We are making really good time, you guys, and now we're moving on to the fourth and final act of Don Quixote.
The wedding act. Act 4 opens with the preparations right before the wedding. You can see Lorenzo, walking about, putting finishing touches on everything before the wedding guests arrive. Then the procession of guests enter, and we can see the gang is all here.
Yes.
Kichi's friends are there, Matadors are there, Espada and Mercedes, of course they're there. More divertissements, bridesmaids, and of course, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza.
Kichi and Basilio thank Don Quixote for helping to bring them both together, and they seat him and Sancho Panza in the seats of honor.
The wedding celebration commences, starting with a Spanish dance, or the fandango as it is called, followed by the bridesmaids dance, which happens just before the iconic wedding pas de deux.
The wedding pas de deux with variations in coda included, is extremely challenging for both the ballerina and the danseur, but the daring steps in this piece really perfectly sum up Kitri and Basilio's dynamic as they enter their marriage, with pride, victory, and complete joy. They have fought so hard to be together, and their persistence has been rewarded, and that is so clearly portrayed throughout the entirety of the pas de deux.
This pas de deux is it's more than a mere divertissement.
Oh yeah,
and
for
it's
sure.
Sort of a culmination of their entire journey together, and it just makes it a heartwarming and triumphant exclamation point at the end of the ballet. One of our favorite parts of the pas de deux is the coda.
Yeah.
When Kitri and Basilio kind of take turns one-upping each other, and they perform increasingly difficult trick steps, and the music's increasing in speed.
Yeah.
It's just incredible to witness that build-up and the release of all that energy.
Yeah.
And it's just so much fun.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
It's the best.
At the end of the celebration, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza wish the newlyweds well and bid farewell to the wedding party. Don Quixote turns to Sancho Panza and tells him that more adventures await beyond the horizon, and the two ride off into the sunset to continue their adventures in knight errantry.
As they leave, Lorenzo, despite being against the arrangement in the beginning, is nevertheless very happy for the new couple, and he proudly hugs his daughter and embraces his new son-in-law at last. And with a long, triumphant blast in the music, he presents them to the crowd, finally, as husband and wife.
So that is the balletified Don Quixote. Does it accurately represent the tales written in Miguel de Cervantes' iconic novel?
Sort of yes, but also no.
There are definitely some key elements in the ballet that make it distinctly Don Quixote, such as Basilio's faked death, throwing Sancho Panza in the air, the windmill scene, and Don Quixote's everlasting search for Dulcinea, etc., etc.
Rather, the ballet seems to tell the story through the eyes and perspective of Don Quixote's friends, acquaintances, and all the other people around him.
But what we can say is that despite being essentially a balletic fan fiction of the novel, the ballet Don Quixote is a charming comedic romance, bursting with life and color, and filled with some of the most incredible, iconic masterpieces.
Even though the ballet varies greatly from production to production, Don Quixote will always be one of those ballets that has you smiling the whole way through and leaves you feeling happy and truly fulfilled as you walk out of the theater.
So there you have it, folks. That is our official, complete, full ballet analysis of Don Quixote. Hopefully you enjoyed this ride just as much as we did, and hopefully you learned more about the story and the rich history behind this iconic classic.
We'd love to hear in the comments what your personal favorite part of Don Quixote is, and if you have a Don Quixote premiering in your area, we really highly recommend that you go and take an evening out and enjoy this amazing masterpiece in real life.
Support your local ballet. If you liked this video, make sure you share it with your ballet nerd friends around the world and also your future ballet nerd friends around the world. And if you like videos like this, which of course you do.
If you made it this far, you must really enjoy it.
Then check out our other full ballet analysis videos linked above in the description, and it'll also be at the end screen, so you can watch those next if you would like to dive into more full ballets. And anyway, I think that is all from us for now. This is Ballet Rain signing off. Until the next video.
Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry. Let's try that again.
Every time, Eden. Every time.
We love context.
Dun, 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 dun.
While Petri dish.
She ignores ganache.
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 Chocolate ganache.
I love ganache. And Don Quixote.
Okay, hokey pokey.
Stop.
Hokey pokey.